Jesus said to his disciples, "Do not be afraid, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give alms. Make purses for yourselves that do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven where no thief comes near and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Be dressed for action and have your lamps lit. Be like those who are waiting for their master to return from the wedding banquet, so that they may open the door for him as soon as he comes and knocks. Blessed are those slaves whom the master finds alert when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will fasten his belt and have them sit down and eat, and he will come and serve them. If he comes during the middle of the night or near dawn and finds them so, blessed are those slaves. But know this, if the owner of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have let his house be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
I always find it fascinating to hear people's spiritual autobiographies, how they tell the story of their life and their faith and how they got to where they are today. Over this last month, I've begun hearing some of your spiritual autobiographies and sharing mine with you. We have all lived very different lives. We come from different backgrounds, different religious traditions, and we have very different experiences. But one thing ties us all together. Somehow, we have all made our way here to St. Mary's in this moment of time, worshiping Christ together. We all share a desire to grow in our faith, to deepen our relationship with God and one another. And that is a beautiful thing. In our passage from the letter to the Hebrews today, we hear, "Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." This is a very well-known and often quoted verse. It sounds nice and it's easy to memorize and to recite in times where we need that little extra boost of faith. I have turned to this verse numerous times in my own life. But as we continue reading our passage in Hebrews, we realize that this nice opening verse is just the tip of the iceberg. It is a wonderful and comforting verse, but we're not meant to take it at face value or to let it stand alone. The author of Hebrews uses this verse as an entry point into what's called the recitation of salvation history, which is basically just a fancy way of saying the recalling of how God has been faithful to God's people, God's presence in and God's call on their lives. It's an abbreviated version of Israel's history, and as such, it's a spiritual autobiography of our forefathers and foremothers in the faith. Their story is what connects us to them, and because their stories are contained in our scriptures, it's also part of what connects us to each other. It begins with a reference to creation, traces major people and events in Israel's history, and ends with Jesus Christ. Our passage today is actually just a very small snippet. This recitation of salvation history takes up the chapters 11 and 12 of Hebrews. Each of the examples that are given clearly point to faith as being a combination of belief and trust and action. We are meant to live our faith, We are meant to let it affect our daily lives. Faith is not always going to be easy, and it's certainly not always going to be smooth. We're expected to struggle. We're expected to experience sacrifice as we grow deeper in our relationship with God. The stories of our spiritual ancestors teach us this, but they also teach us what incredible and amazing and wonderful things happen when we step out in faith and embrace the unknown, when we embrace mystery. In fact, in this recitation of salvation history, when the author gets to Jesus in chapter 12 of Hebrews, he says, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight of sin that clings so closely. Let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith." We are meant to follow in the footsteps of those who have come before. We are meant to learn from their examples. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Our reciting of salvation history begins with this. By faith, we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. Creation. The author is saying that we don't understand how the world was made, but we have faith that somehow the word of God was involved. We have faith that God was present in bringing what we currently see out of nothing. Our understanding of creation is obviously much different today than it was 2,000 years ago when this letter was written, but I think that this still rings true. The more that I learn about science and evolution and how beautifully complex our world is, the more convinced I become that God works through our natural world, through our evolutionary processes, in ways that are deeply mysterious. We then jump in our passage to Abraham, the father of the Israelite people, the one with whom God made the covenant that continues today. We hear about Abraham's faith when God called him to leave his homeland and begin a journey, not knowing where he was going or what would happen along the way. Abraham's story is one of struggle and triumph and defeat and a deep refusal of Abraham to give up on God and a refusal of God to give up on Abraham. We hear of how Abraham's faith impacted those around him as he and Sarah began their family and continued on the journey. And this is a beautiful metaphor for our own lives. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. It's the conviction of things not seen. Like Abraham, God calls us to something in our lives. In reality, God is constantly calling us to new things in our lives. Sometimes those callings involve physical moves for jobs or family or a new phase in our lives. We literally enter a new place. Like Abraham, we set out for a place that we are to receive as our inheritance, a place that God has prepared for us. We set out not knowing where we're going, and not knowing who or what awaits us, not able to anticipate how much our lives will change as a result of this relocation. No matter how much we plan or prepare, there will be surprises. There's always an element of the unknown when we set out for a new journey. So we say our goodbyes, we cry for what is ending, but then we look ahead with anticipation, trusting that in ways that we do not yet understand, this is what we must do and where we must go. We set out in faith, faith in the assurance of things hoped for, faith in the conviction of things not yet seen. We are told that by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he would receive as an inheritance. And he set out, not knowing where he was going. Abraham set out for a physical place, but many changes took place for himself and his family as they journeyed. God doesn't always call us to make literal moves. God much more often calls us to make emotional, ideological, educational, or relational moves. As people, we are constantly growing, constantly learning, constantly evolving in ourselves and in our relationships. And God is a part of this. God calls us to set out to new territory in these areas of our lives as well. Our inheritance is embracing our identity as children of God. And this is not something that awaits us later. It's always present. It's always true. But growing into this and accepting it is a lifelong journey. There are an infinite number of ways that we can grow in our faith and follow God's call in our life. But one element should remain steady: being part of a Christian community. Christianity has always been a communal religion. It was started by a community of Jesus' disciples who spread out and formed new communities in new cities and new countries. While personal prayer and study is absolutely essential, so is being part of a Christian community. Since you all are here today, you've already made that first step. You've come to worship with each other, with your fellow St. Marians. And that's huge. There are many demands on our time and on our energy. And this morning, we all chose to be here, worshiping together. But Sunday morning worship isn't the only way to be in community with our fellow St. Marians. Next Sunday, we'll kick off our program year, and I am so excited about the different things that we have, the different opportunities that we've got to come together to follow Jesus' call and to go deeper in our relationship with him. We have numerous Bible studies that are studying a variety of themes and books. We have the Adult Forum, which will cover different topics throughout the year. We have a serious scholars group for those who want an academic bent to their study. We have youth Bible studies, EYC for middle and high school students, godly play for our children, adult and youth confirmation classes, retreats, mission opportunities. We have new worship and prayer opportunities that will be starting. Morning and evening prayer every day. We have additional weekday Eucharist that will be held for major feasts. We have a centering prayer group for those who wish to be silent in the presence of God. And Taizé contemplative worship once a month. More information about each of these offerings will be available this week and in the weeks to come. So I encourage you to pay attention to your weekly newsletter. Pay attention to the brochures that will be available next week. Call the church and ask questions. And try something new. Explore a type of prayer or study or worship that you've never tried before. Challenge yourself to set out for a new place, a new spiritual frontier. Follow the example of Abraham and Sarah and the many other matriarchs and patriarchs of our faith who set out not knowing where they were going, but knowing that God was calling them into a deeper relationship. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. What are you hoping for this year? How are you hoping to deepen your faith? And how might you do that here at St. Mary's?